Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an incredibly multifaceted personality, a well-known professional from New York, USA, Mr. Peter Shankman. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Peter is an author, an entrepreneur, and a futurist in residence at the BluShark Digital. New York Times has called him a rock star who knows everything about social media and then some. And all of you know, I'm very partial to authors. Peter is a 5 times best-selling author. So Peter, let me start by asking you about your incredible journey. Tell me about how life has been.
So I wasn't supposed to be doing any of this, right? Okay. I was born and raised in New York City. I'm a New York City public school kid. I went to Boston University and graduated by the skin of my teeth with a journalism degree. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And this was in the mid 90s. And there was something called an online network. It was called America Online. And only geeks and nerds used America Online. And of course, I was a geek and a nerd, so I was on America Online. And someone in the chat room that I was in said, "Hey, my company's trying to build a newsroom. Why don't you submit your resume?" And I said, "Sure, I have no experience, but this will be great." And I was being sarcastic. They didn't know that. And 2 weeks later, I was hired by America Online to move down to Virginia and become one of the founders of the newsroom at AOL.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it was an incredible 3 years. Literally, we learned as we went along. There's no training like that anywhere in the world. It was amazing. I left AOL in the late 90s and I moved back to New York. And I figured, I have some knowledge of the internet, and the .com is starting to blow up, .com world. So maybe I'll launch a PR firm to help .coms. Had no idea how to do it. But it was the right time. All the big companies needed PR and they all needed help. And so I launched the agency, and we had clients immediately like Napster and Juno and big .com players. We all know what happened with the .com boom. So I sold the agency in 2001. Again, consulted for several years, had no clue as to what I was supposed to be doing, but just made it up as I went along. And that's pretty much been my life. And then my big thing was in 2007, I talk to everyone. I have a neurodiverse condition called ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which means I talk to everyone. If you're on a plane next to me, unless you fake your death, I'm going to know everything about you by the time we land. Okay. And so I have this huge Rolodex, this huge, book of contacts, of sources. And journalists who knew me would call me and say, "Hey, I'm doing a story on whatever. Who do you know?" I say, "Oh, call this person or call that person." Well, one thing led to another, and I was getting lots of calls from journalists. "Hey, I'm doing a story on this." And I said, "There's got to be a better way to do this." So I started a mailing list where I would send out these queries to my friends, and word got out, and the list blew up. And within 3 years, I was sending out 3 emails a day to about 750,000 people in each email, with almost an 80% open rate. It was obscene because all these queries from the media. On the day you didn't read it, the New York Times was doing a story on your industry. You missed out, so you had to read it. In just under 3 years, it was acquired by a company called Cision, now part of PR Newswire. And I walked away. Tried to relax. I realized that I was never taught how to do that. So have been consulting and writing books. I'm a talking head on CNN. I'm a single dad of a 9-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old loud dog. And in my few minutes of spare time, I'm a boxer. I'm a triathlete, and I'm a skydiver. So that's sort of my story.
Amazing. I think you forgot to add you're an Ironman and a Peloton rider.
Yes, I'm an avid Peloton junkie. I'm on my bike, but again, that's for the brain, right? If I don't exercise in the morning, I don't get those chemicals that let me be at my best. So the exercise is very much mental.
Amazing. What an amazing journey you've had. Congratulations. And thank you for agreeing to share it, so much of it with me. So let's now talk a little bit about BluShark Digital. Tell me about BluShark Digital, and you're a futurist in residence. So what is your role?
So BluShark is a marketing and SEO company in Washington, D.C. that primarily works with lawyers and doctors.
Okay.
Lawyers and doctors are known for being terrible at marketing and being terrible at SEO. And there's a huge market for them to get better at that. BluShark is one of the few companies that focuses specifically on that and is very good at it. The company is run by a very close friend of mine who I've worked with for over 20 years. And he asked me if I could come down and be this futurist, essentially to think about not what's happening in the next quarter, but what's happening in the next quarter century. Right. And you find that, unfortunately, in today's economy, companies, especially CEOs, no longer have permission to think about the next quarter century because their stockholders, their shareholders, are requiring that they show profit every quarter, they show growth, they show them. But in a fiduciary capacity, that's actually not the best thing for the company. The best thing for the company is to dig in and figure out, okay, where are we going to be in 25 years? How are we going to grow and still be around in 25 years, still be useful, still be profitable, and then work to make that happen. And unfortunately, it's very difficult for a CEO to do that because if a CEO doesn't show growth, quarter over quarter, they're out. And so a lot of what I'm tasked with doing for these big law firms and these big doctors' facilities and that is thinking about what's going to happen, where they need to be in 20 years, in 10 years, and how they can start getting there now. I'll give you an example. There are law firms out there whose sole purpose in life is to handle car accidents, let's say, for example, right? And they have their plates full constantly because most people will get into an accident through no fault of their own, or through their fault of their own, whatever. What happens in 20 years when car accidents drop by 98% because of self-driving autonomous vehicles? What do they do when there are no more car accidents? Let's take it a step further. 90% of all organ donations come from fatal car accidents.
Correct.
If you are a hospital with an emergency room that relies on a steady stream of organs, what do? Right? I'll take it a step further. If you're an insurance company who insures cars, what do? So that's sort of how I'm thinking about it. If you're a hospital, you better be thinking about 3D printing and how you can use 3D printing to print organs.
Correct.
Right? Things like that. So for me, it's exciting because I look at it almost like a game, right? If you remember those games when you were a kid, there was a book series called Choose Your Own Adventure where you'd read and it said, if you want to slay the dragon, go to page 48. If you want to run away, go to page 62. So I look at life as a Choose Your Own Adventure book. Right? What happens if we do this? Let's follow it 5 steps down and see what happens. And so I go and I work with BluShark's clients all around the world. And I help them try to figure out, where are you going to be in 10 years, 20 years? How do we get there? How do we lay the foundation, the groundwork now for you to be there in 20 years?
And that's absolutely fascinating. But what kind of training do you have to do, or what kind of learning do you need to be able to look at the future?
It's interesting. I was having this conversation with someone a few months ago, and I realized something. Long after the conversation ended, I woke up in the middle of the night, I'm like, oh, 2 things I think have brought me to this point. One of them, strangely enough, is growing up in Manhattan. So I was born and raised in New York City, and I grew up in the 70s and 80s when New York City wasn't really that great. It was actually really dangerous. And to be a 14-year-old kid in high school on 65th Street and Amsterdam Avenue, having to take the subway by myself at 1986, things like that, you learn to grow eyes in the back of your head. Or more importantly, you learned to constantly keep your head on a swivel and trust your gut. Right? That street, there are a bunch of people in the middle of it. You know what? I'm going to go to the next block. Right? Or that guy on the subway looks a little suspicious. I'm going to go to the next car. And that was sort of ingrained in New Yorkers who grew up here. I'm watching my 9-year-old daughter, and she has it too. And I think a lot of that, and also I think being a skydiver as well, everyone says, oh, it's so dangerous. Why do you do it? Well, because for me, I'm constantly looking after I open my parachute, the only thing that matters is getting to the ground safely. Well, when you're approaching final, there are 10, 15 other skydivers from that plane who are doing the same thing. So you're constantly looking in 4, 5, 6, 7 different places at once. right? Making small adjustments and small, minute adjustments to your canopy, to your parachute, to make sure you land without crashing into someone, without hitting the ground too hard. So it's things like that. It's having that sort of that open mind that says, okay, what happens if we do that? What happens if we do that? What happens if this happens? Then what happens to that? And again, I think a lot of it also has to do with ADHD and the concept of that neurodiverse brain. Growing up, I was constantly in trouble in school because I would come up with ways to do things that were not the norm, but they worked. Teachers back then, if you didn't do it like everyone else, that was wrong. Right. And so it wasn't so much that I was getting in, I wasn't getting in trouble because I enjoyed getting in trouble. I was getting in trouble because my brain didn't know any better. And technically I was giving myself those chemicals, I'd do something, it would work. I'd be excited. I'd get the chemicals in my brain that I needed to focus. So, now teachers learn more, know more about that and kids have more options. But yeah, back then I didn't really have a choice. And so for me, learning to do things differently, I think started as young as I can remember. And you fast forward to today, that's the kind of things I see. I read the news in the morning. Okay, what is that? It's not so much here's what happened. It's what does that mean? Right? And I think the last point that I'd make on that is I would call it a gift. One of the things that my parents taught me, listen, be careful of whose advice you take, but listen to everyone's advice. And I've used that my entire life. And I try to teach my daughter that as well, that everyone knows something that you don't. Everyone in the world has a perspective and knowledge on something that you don't or might be different than yours. And that doesn't mean that they're right, but it means that you should hear it.
Correct.
And make your own decisions. And I think that especially today, and especially in this country and mostly all over the world, social media has put us into our own bubbles, our own echo chambers, where we only hear from people who think the same as us.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a very dangerous thing.
Absolutely.
Being able to hear other points, the amygdala in the brain, the purpose behind that is when you start to get upset or you start to get uncomfortable, is to put yourself in a flight or fight response. Right. I box, and one of my trainers taught me when I'm warming up to keep my hands down, because the second I bring my hands up, the amygdala in the brain says, "Oh, fight or flight. Where's the punch? Where's the punch? Where's the?" But when you're warming up, you just want to warm up. You don't want to have the emotional response. So being able to have a non-emotional response and being able to listen to other points of view without getting angry, without having to fight back, is a talent that I think many more people need to work on, including myself. We all do. But that allows me to hear other points, and from that, start thinking about what might be next.
Fascinating. So one more question relating to the futurist part, and then we'll move to another segment. You spoke about, with the example that you gave, you talked about technology, about the motor car business and legal firms and medical and so on and so forth. With so much focus now on artificial intelligence, what do you think technology will do to the role that you play of being able to look at the future?
It's a really good question. I think the biggest problem over the last 20 years is that we underestimated the power of computers and overestimated the power of people.
Correct.
Or let me rephrase that. We underestimated the intelligence of computers and overestimated the intelligence of people.
Correct.
Right? I remember being on the internet, quote unquote, in 1987, right? With dial-up, 1991 with Usenet and with FTP and with Gopher and things like that. And the future was incredible because having all this information in a computer that you could go home and look at or go to your dorm room and look at, now we have it all on our phones. Yeah. And what do we do with it? We use it to argue with people and to look at pictures of cats. Now, I have no problem with looking at pictures of cats. I'm a cat guy. I have a dog, but I used to be a cat guy. The problem I have is that, again, we're too quick to become emotional and rush to judgment. AI does not get emotional, at least not yet. Right? Once it gets emotional, then we've violated Asimov's third law, and that's when the machines start killing us and it's all over anyway. But until AI gets emotional, we are still able to be smarter than AI because we can still put emotion into things when needed. And that's the key, when needed, right? If artificial intelligence says, go to that building, pick up a package and come home, and as it's walking, it sees a child a baby that somehow is lying in the street and is about to get run over, artificial intelligence is not going to determine, hey, I should go pick up that baby. That's where human emotion still comes into play.
Correct.
That hasn't been solved yet. And I think we're a long way from solving that. So while AI is phenomenal, and you know, the fact that my entire house, I can talk to everything in my condo here in Manhattan, and it does, you know, I don't have to do everything is voice controlled, which is wonderful. We're not at the point where AI is going to replace anything that we consider thought process, right? That involves any form of emotion or any form of looking at the past or imagining the future. You know, there are a lot of AIs now that can, you tell it something and it will draw what it believes to be. And you look at some of those, and just a quick cursory glance tells you we're not there yet. You know, what do you see in the future? And all of a sudden it's these AI draws nothing but a robot, right? Well, there's still going to be people. The internet was supposed to get rid of paper and that didn't work. So, you know, we're not there yet.
Okay, well said. So let me move on, Peter, and ask you about, you're the founder of HARO, Help a Reporter Out. Tell me about this initiative and how have you supported thousands of journalists?
Well, HARO, again, was designed because, like I said, I talk to everyone, and I'm of the belief at the end of the day that no matter what you do, no matter how you choose to make money, you should be focusing on helping people, right? You should be putting 10 times the amount of help into the universe for every time you ask for one. And so I would always talk to journalists. I knew journalists. I knew them from my previous jobs. I knew them from AOL. And over time, they would start to rely on me as someone who knew a lot of people and who knew a lot of sources. And when they were on deadline, journalists today have to do 10 times more with 5 times less. And so back in 2007, and as the more journalists started asking me about stuff, the more I said, you know, let me see if I can figure out a way to help you. I have an audience. I'll just send an email out to them. And, you know, the best ideas are the ones that percolate automatically and humanize whatever it is you're trying to create. And so I started sending out these emails, and people who I didn't know started emailing me and saying, hey, can you add me to that list? And then journalists started calling and saying, hey, I hear you have this list, right? We trust you. You came from the key for me was every journalist that joined came because the journalist they trusted told them about my list. You know, it's the equivalent of marketing versus advertising. If I tell you about something and you trust me, you're going to use it. If you have to find out about it, or if someone tells you about their own thing, it's not, you know, if I walk into a bar and see a beautiful person say, hey, I'm really awesome, you should have a drink with me, they're not going to. But if their best friend says, hey, I know that guy, I trust him, he's pretty awesome, you should have a drink with him, they're going to. Well, and so I built something on word of mouth that was needed and grew. And it's still a free service. My premise was, let's make it free. And so it became this huge email list, and we were sending out 3 times a day, and it was acquired, back in 2010, a while back.
Okay, wonderful. Then we move to another initiative of yours, which is the Shank Minds Breakthrough Network. What is this all about?
So after I sold Help a Reporter, so for me, for a life-changing amount of money, it was one of those things where everyone who had a Millionaires Mastermind, right, all came out of the woodwork. People I'd never heard of before. Oh, you should join my mastermind. It's this. You'll do your name for only 20 grand a year, 50 grand a year, 100 grand. And I'm sitting there going, if I had that much money back when I was starting my company, I wouldn't need it. Right. And I realized there was nothing for entrepreneurs who maybe were just starting out or who had one company or 2, you know, who just wanted other like-minded people without being charged a fortune. And so I launched a mastermind group. And Shank Minds was born. I keep it under 100 people at all times. We have a couple of Zoom calls a week. We have, before COVID, we were having meetings every quarter in person. Now we do them virtually twice and in person twice. But it's basically a playground. We have a private Facebook group and a playground where people can just share. Hey, I have a meeting with someone. What kind of questions do you think I should ask him? Or I'm doing this. Does anyone know anyone in this industry or whatever? And they're all trusted sources. They're all everyone who joins is brought in by someone recommended or brought in by someone they know, and it's no pressure. And I charge, I think it's like $89 a month, which is like a latte, right? You know, the goal is for it to be useful. It was never about me making a ton of money. It was about giving back.
Sure.
And so that blew up. We started that about 8 years ago. It's still growing up.
Interesting. So I've got 2 more questions, different questions. I want to move to your books. You know, you've written 5 best-selling books. Tell me about your books, and are they available on Amazon?
They're available everywhere. So 4 of them are business books. It's starting with Can We Do That, which is about PR stunts. I wrote that in 2005 or 2006. New Rules for a Customer Service World was 2010. Nice Companies Finish First, which was a study on companies that are nicer to their employees tend to make more money. And then Zombie Loyalists was the 4th one, which was about growing customer experience. And I took a left turn. And that was when I got diagnosed with my ADHD. And I realized it was a gift. And I realized that more people need to understand that their children or them, they're not broken, they're gifted. And so that was my latest one, which was called Faster Than Normal. And that was about the tips and tricks and hacks I use in my life to allow my ADHD to work for me. We're having this conversation, just an example, we're having this conversation right now, and I am totally focused on you because I spent 2 hours before my daughter got up this morning exercising, right? I was on my Peloton for an hour and I boxed for an hour. And so I have the chemicals from that will keep me going all day.
Wow.
And it's one of those things where I don't have a choice, right? At my daughter's 9 now. At 5 years old, I never forget that we're having breakfast one day and she goes, "Daddy, did you get on your bike today?" I said, "No, I was touching." She goes, "I know, you're not as happy."
Amazing.
So that tells me that there is a difference. And if you want, something that helps you, you have to be willing to do it and sacrifice other things.
Well said.
Everyone mocks me because, I just turned 50 and I'm fitting that stereotype where a friend of mine said, "Hey, do you have your kids tonight?" I'm like, "No." I'm like, "Cool, we're going out tonight. You want to meet around 9?" I'm like, "Hell no." 9 p.m. Are you kidding me? No. But I'm asleep because I'm awake at 4 a.m. to get on the bike, and I prefer it.
Well said. Well said. And my last question to you, Peter, though I must tell you that, the schedule that you said matches mine exactly. I'm fast asleep at 9:15 and I'm awake at 4 a.m. every morning. And that's a fantastic schedule to follow.
And I want to premise, I'm not saying that people who are night owls are wrong.
No, absolutely.
It just works for me.
Absolutely.
If you do your best work at 2 a.m. before you go to bed, great, do that. Absolutely. But find what works for you and do that.
I agree with you completely. And my last question to you, Peter, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. You've had such an incredible life, such an amazing journey, and you've done so many diverse things. What would you say are 3 lessons you want our viewers and listeners to take away from your own life's journey and from our conversation?
I'd say a couple of things. I think the first thing is that I heard a great quote once. When I first started skydiving, I was complaining to an older skydiver, and you want to listen to older skydivers because if they're old and they're still skydiving, it means they've been smart enough not to die, right? So you want to listen to what they have to say. And I was complaining that all my friends who didn't skydive didn't understand why I did, and all my friends who did skydive didn't understand why I want to go home, whatever. And this old skydiver said to me, he goes, "Peter, if you can't change the people around you, change the people around you." And that just blew my mind. Because if that is really as easy as it is, we have a limited amount of time on this earth. Spend it with people who support you. Spend it with people who raise you up. And I'm not saying surround yourself with yes men, but I am saying surround yourself with people. If you're going to listen to anyone, have people who believe in you, right? And understand also that 99% of the people out there don't. They're not out to hurt you, but they are out to better themselves.
Correct.
Right? So focus on the people. Water doesn't, your boat doesn't sink because of the water outside. It sinks because of the water inside. Be aware of your circle. And I think that's that, and just doing your own thing and not caring what other people think. They're 2 hard lessons to learn, but they work for me. Once I learned them, it changed my life.
Wonderful. And on that note, Peter, and your amazing lessons of stay with people who believe in you and do your own thing. And I've often said this, it is what I call my who cares philosophy. As long as you can do what you want. And I remember my father used to tell me that every morning when you wake up and you're shaving and looking at yourself in the mirror, if you can tell yourself honestly, looking at yourself, I did not knowingly do any harm to anybody yesterday, that's the only justification you need.
Amen. I love that.
Thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me about the amazing amount of stuff that you're doing. Thank you for talking to me about all the work you're doing as a futurist. I'm sure a lot of my viewers and listeners would really enjoy understand what a futurist does. Thank you for talking to me about HARO, about the Shank Minds Breakthrough Network, and about all your books. Thank you again, and good luck.
Thank you, Ashish. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.